G'day guys, and today it's time to talk about cannabis down under. Now, the issue of cannabis legalization caught my attention as I was reading the news that Canada has just legalized cannabis for recreational use, and there's 5 states in the US that are seeking to either decriminalize or legalize in some manner of capacity. So what's going on with cannabis down under? Well, the two main parties, the Liberals and the Labor, have no interest whatsoever in legalizing or decriminalizing cannabis. They cite issues such as, the gateway drug, and it'll affect our opiate industry, which doesn't make much sense to me, but whatever. And also, negative psychological effects and that sort of thing. It's addictive. All the boomer talking points. Once again, the main parties are not reflective of the Australian population. Prohibition concerning cannabis in Australia has certainly not worked. 35% of Australians have used cannabis. 10.4% of Australians aged 14 and up have used it in the last 12 months, and 4.1% have used it within the last week. It is estimated that 750,000 Australians use cannabis every week, and approximately 300,000 smoke it on a daily basis. This means that Australia has one of the highest cannabis prevalence rates in the world. There are two forces in the Australian Senate that seek to legalise cannabis for recreational use in some capacity. First of all, we had the Greens Party, which is sort of a further left, somewhat more authoritarian party than the Labor Party. And they seek to essentially give the state a monopoly over cannabis production and wholesale, which I can't agree with, because monopolies are not the best at responding to demands within society, within the marketplace, I should say. Because if you have a monopoly, there's nowhere else to go, so you can just abuse people and charge them however much you like and put out whatever product you like, and it doesn't matter, it's the only source. State-run monopoly will not be able to stop people going to their local dealer, because if you think of it this way, if the state puts out an inferior product, what's going to make people buy that? If it's more expensive, if it's highly taxed and regulated as the Greens want it to be, or if it's simply just not that good, because the Greens want a watered-down version, people are just going to go to their local dealer. So there's no guarantee that their venture will even be successful, and it will just be a giant drain on the public pocket. The Liberal Democrats, on the other hand, being a more libertarian party, want a more free market approach. They want to legalise weed at the Commonwealth level at all levels. So that's recreational and commercial. So they don't give a fuck if it's just, old mate having a smoke after work, which is one example that was brought up in the David Leyonhjelm's speech to the Senate. And they also want the free market to have control over the commercial side of it, so they want as much competition as possible. So essentially, the Liberal Democrats' bill would allow each state to do what it wants concerning weed. You can keep it illegal, you can legalise it for commercial use, you can only decriminalise it, you can have it for medical purposes. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how each state competes with one another in this sector, because there are a few interesting points that were brought up by David Leyonhjelm in his speech to the Senate. The first is the reduction in the cost of policing. Each year, $1.5 billion is spent on drug enforcement in Australia. 1.05 billion, or 70% of this, is spent on cannabis enforcement. So in the 2016 to 2017 year, there were 77,500 arrests relating to cannabis. Obviously, this is a lot of money that could be saved. $1 billion is a lot of fucking money to throw around. You could put that anywhere else. Education, research, green energy, and things like that. So there's a lot of money that you can save within the government, which is always handy. The second point is that the legalisation of cannabis would cut off supply of income for criminal gangs and things like that. So the money it would essentially increase competition within the market. There is a cannabis market in Australia, it's just not legal. It's a black market. So suddenly your criminal gang has to compete with multiple enterprises within the free market that might be able to produce a better quality product, because they're able to have it on an industrial scale and not so shabby. They don't have to hide their production and hide their fields and hide their prep and all the detrimental effects that may have. If you need to hide your cannabis crop, maybe it's not getting the best sunlight, therefore it's not getting the best buds and things like that. So the third point is tax revenue. Now, of course, taxation is theft, but let's just entertain the thought anyway. It is predicted that the legalization of cannabis within Australia would generate $300 million in goods and services tax revenue. That's pretty cool. If you are pro-tax or you're thinking about that, it's, taxation is theft, but it's something to consider anyway, because the government's not just going to evaporate overnight. This doesn't include income tax and things like that. So the cashier working at your weed dispensary is going to be making some money and paying taxes. And maybe he wouldn't have had that job, or maybe he'd be paying less tax if he didn't have that job. It's just something to consider. To conclude, I think this is a positive step in the right direction towards creating a free society. At the moment, we can't actually claim to live in an enlightened free society, as we cannot exercise property rights over our own body. We cannot, wander around, find a plant on the ground, roll it up and smoke it. Economic impact and reduced burden on police is just the cherry on top of this very delicious cake. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.